We might as well see what he said, right? I just want to see. I just want to see. Make a step.
Really sad that American children who need these services aren't able to get them because it's going to fraudsters instead of somebody else.
Wait, wait, wait. Hold on. What?
Adults are enrolled in Medicaid. And the bigger picture of how do you think that the polls show that Democrats historically have made advantage on healthcare? Do you think that these efforts on fraud might change that for Republicans?
I'm not really worried about the politics. I'm worried about the justice of it all. I think it's offensive that American taxpayers pay into these programs and they are defrauded. But I think, in
Oh.
some ways, more significantly than that, it's really sad that American children who need these services aren't able to get them because it's going to fraudsters instead of somebody else. So here's what I think. I mean, look, we're certainly going to make sure that our anti-fraud efforts go after the fraudsters and not after anybody who actually benefits from these services. But I actually think the question is a little off in a way because the problem is not going after the fraud. The problem is the fact that these programs are being defrauded to begin with.
Uh
They
huh.
will not exist.
What is a
Our social
system?
safety net will disappear unless we take fraud more seriously. So, what I'm most worried about is that unless we preserve these programs for the next generation, they're going to disappear and all the money is going to go to fraudsters. Go ahead.
Huge. Thanks, Dr. Benson. You're mentioning a lot about the justice of it all. So, what exactly would that look like? I think Dr. Ross had mentioned that jail sentences aren't necessarily the right way to go, but is there a way to claw some of this money back? Ways to get refunds? Do you want restrictions on that? Because then I have a follow up question as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, there are certainly ways to claw some of the money back. It depends on the circumstances of the case. When you're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars potentially in fraud, that's a big universe of cases. There are different ways of anticipating it. You heard Dr. Oz say some of these people they will commit a crime and then leave the country. Obviously, we're not going to prosecute people who aren't even in the United States anymore.
Ha!
But I really do think that criminal penalties for some of these
My
fraud cases
studio.
have to happen. We have to make sure that we stop the fraud being committed against the American people. And if you violate the law in the process of defrauding American citizens, you ought to face the full consequences of the law.
You said a few weeks ago that there would be a new assistant attorney general position to
Yep.
advance this effort. Can you give me an update on a timeline for when we might see a name announced? When you want the Senate to start working on confirmation of that?
Yeah, so I believe we have the name announced. I would say that Colin is on the Hill maybe today or yesterday. Colin will be the new AAG to help us combat fraud. I believe we had great meetings all over the Hill today as part of the Senate confirmation process. I think he's impressed a lot of people. He's certainly impressed me. And again, we have a whole of government approach. I mean, what Dr. Oz is doing at CMS is very, very hard work, but it's not the only thing. We're trying to buttress it with a whole of government approach. Scott Bassett at Treasury is going to work on this. We're going to have our great Department of Justice work on this. We want to take this seriously because it's a serious problem for the American people, and so we got to fix it. Go ahead.
Thank you. Will the way that you're handling fraud in Minnesota by withholding this Medicaid reimbursement serve as a playbook for how you'll handle it in other states, or are there other tools that you'll be using that you'd like to preview?
Well, I think it can, certainly. There are certain things that we're doing in Minneapolis and Minnesota that we're not going to be able to do in other parts of the country because the fraud is going to be different in each place. But yeah, I think this basic model of saying to people, hey, you get a massive amount of money to provide a service to people. Did you actually provide that service? The fact that it's even controversial that we're asking these questions as a government goes to show how much the culture of fraud has permeated Washington, D.C. Think about this. We're talking about people who take money from autistic children. They pretend their children or some other person's kid is autistic. They collect a fat check. They don't provide an ounce of services. And then the very money that's supposed to go to needy kids isn't there anymore to help those needy children. The fact that we have so normalized this, and the fact that I guarantee there are going to be voices in the media, there are going to be voices in the state of Minnesota who say, this is hurting children. No, it's hurting fraudsters. The way to protect kids is to go after those fraudsters, which is what we're doing. Sir.
President, thank you for taking questions. Dr. Oz mentioned the word guardrails when it comes to this. Can we expect to see the federal government look to implement new guardrails to prevent the normalization of fraud like this from continuing? Do you believe it would be more effective for states that you're investigating to put up guardrails? Do you think that the best
I mean, look, we would love to better work with the states here. We need the states to combat this fraud. And frankly, if Minnesota had done a better job of combating the fraud, we would not be here at this press conference today. We'd send out a letter celebrating the fact that Minnesota had worked with us to cut down on some of the fraud. I'll let Dr. Oz speak a little bit more to that question. But look, the best way for this to work would be for the federal government to work with the state governments. We'd love for that to happen. I think you're going to see that in some states, even some blue states, but you're not going to see it in others.
The working family tax cut legislation, for the first time in a long time, aligned the president and vice president with the governor so they have the same goal. So we've been talking to the states a lot. We are generating some frameworks that we believe states could apply. Medicaid is run by the state. They know their most vulnerable populations well. It's different than Alaska on the North Shore slope where you can't get there this time of year to southern Alabama, lower Alabama, or LA as they call it. But the reality is there are similarities that govern some of these programs, especially the ones that are at high risk. And so we're going to share those best practices. But the techniques that we're using in Minnesota can be applied in other states. But it's the fraud, however, that will drive that. And so there are some states, I mentioned Florida, that's a red state where there's a big fraud problem in the southern part. They're trying to get their arms around it. We've sent a letter to Minnesota, which has a Republican senator. We're very concerned about New York, where the single most prominent job in New York is a personal care service. Retail is not the top job in New York anymore. And so in California, there are more hospices, I believe, in Los Angeles County than the rest of the country.
Nice.
These are aberrancies that are hard for the states sometimes to see, but your first inclination, if you're the vice president and he's running a task force, is to look at those areas and say, how can you ignore that kind of a discrepancy, especially when there's been a massive uptick in some of these services in a short period of time?
Great. We'll take just one more question here, sir.
What is your message to the people of Minnesota who are still upset by the ICE surge as well? And this is just one more thing on top of that.
Well, first of all, I think our message to the people of Minnesota is that we love them. They're our fellow citizens. We're trying to do right by them. And part of the reason, in fact, the main reason that we're doing this is that we want to make sure that the people of Minnesota have access to the services that they're entitled to. We want poor kids in Minnesota, lower income families in Minnesota to be able to get the health care that they need. We got to stop the fraud in order to make sure that happens. We want to make sure that if you have a special needs kid and we have a program set up to help that special needs kid, that the money goes to the special needs family, not to a fraudster who's getting rich off the generosity of American taxpayers. Now, you talk about the ICE surge. Again, I think it goes back to the question I just answered, which is so much of what is broken in Minnesota, as far as I can tell, is a lack of cooperation between the state government and the federal government. If you look at any blue city or any blue state or red city or red state, the immigration enforcement that we were doing was going smoothly. We'd find out that there was an illegal alien sex offender at a prison. We'd show up, we'd arrest that person, and we'd send him out of our country. Or maybe that person was a repeat offender and they were out of prison. The local authorities would say, you know what? Go and go to this person's address and arrest this guy because we want that violent criminal out of our community. What was so bizarre about Minneapolis is that it was one of the few places in the entire country where they said, no, we're not going to help the federal government get illegal alien sex traffickers out of our community. We're going to do everything that we can to prevent federal immigration enforcement from happening, even when you're going after the very worst of the very worst. Similarly, I would think that if I was the governor or a leader in Minnesota, I would want the benefits that ought by right to go to needy children. I want them to go to those needy children and not to fraudsters, whether they're in the Somali community or anywhere else. But no, we haven't gotten the cooperation. So what I would say to the people of Minnesota is that we want to do right by you. We think you deserve better public services.
I'm so bored.
To have the benefits that you're actually
They do this on purpose. It's
and that's
clockwork.
why we're doing this, and we encourage everybody in Minnesota, whatever their political affiliation, to work on the state government a little bit, because if we had some better cooperation, we could have common sense immigration enforcement. We could also have less money going to fraudsters, which I would think is a bipartisan issue. Thank you.
Oh my goodness. Dude, what the heck? What? Well, they came to the table. I'm gonna leave it there. That was a lot. Let me process it, and then we'll go back. I've been shaking this entire time since I woke up. So, um, yeah. Wow. Wow. Do you know how hard it is to be untitled when you're like, all right, yeah, I'll be back.